Hello, everyone. Hello, YouTube. This is Tim Cain, Violence as the Default in AAA RPGs. Which is very much, I think we all kind of agree that this is definitely the default. Similar to how, like, you notice how a lot of TV dramas are about crime and, or, crime or violence, something like that, right? Something dramatic and gripping and, easy to shock. One of the things that I really enjoyed about, like, Mad Men, the TV show, for instance, was that it was completely the opposite. Um, it would be nice to see more AAA RPGs or games with significant budgets that were a bit more systems driven, but I also think that maybe some of this is just the reality of where all the money is in the industry. I don't know. I'd have to look at more modern metrics and numbers of what people are playing, but I would venture to bet that it's just because that's where a lot of the money is, and because AAA games are so expensive to make, this is kind of what you have to make if you want to be able to have a return on that initial investment. Let's see what Tim says.
Hi everyone, it's me,
Hi,
Tim,
Tim.
and today I want to talk
Happy Sunday,
about
Tim.
violence as the default in AAA
Yeah,
RPGs. It's a very specific title because I mean all of this. I'm talking about violence. I'm talking about games that have violence as the default thing. That's what they expect you to do, and I'm only talking about AAA RPGs because this came from a very
okay.
good, thoughtful, and well-written question by Saber VS7, who asked, "Hi Tim, I'm curious as to if you think games, well, practically speaking, the RPG genre specifically, at the mainstream budget level, I know there's plenty of indies who are trying to be the change you want to see in this regard, will be able to evolve past the paradigm of violence being the default way in which the player interacts with the world." Just so you know, this went on for a long time, his question, because he wanted to clarify it and make sure I knew what he was asking. And I appreciate that. I'm just not going to read the whole thing. I actually had originally written a response to his question, but then I realized I deleted it and I'm like, this really needs a video. It needs a longer response, somewhat nuanced, and very specific. And I want to keep repeating that because I'm talking about violence being, combat. I'm talking about whether or not games treat it as the default, because a lot of games have it, but they don't expect you to
That's
do
true.
it. And we're talking about AAA RPGs, like big budget RPGs. We're not talking about indies. We're not talking about solo devs. Also, I realize my answers some people aren't going to like because I've gotten pushback on similar answers in the past, but let's see what
Yeah,
happens.
and we'll see what I say, because I want to preface this by saying that you have to, when you think about, is this okay? Because clearly games are still selling, people are still buying games with violence as the default, or the expected behavior of the player to interact with the world, are still selling. So, if we want to, just for the sake of argument, ask ourselves, is there something better? Is the current norm bad? And let's just play some devil's advocate and say, yes, we'd like to explore alternatives for interacting with the world. You have to ask yourself, well, what is violence fulfilling for the player, and why is it interesting? I guess this is a bit of a psychological study of why do we like killing things, but it's like it's taboo, right? So if I load up any fantasy CRPG, let's just say Baldur's Gate or something, or Skyrim, right? You have monsters, and it's not like monsters in those games are expected to kill, but it's normal because it fits within the this kind of it fits within the lore of the world, that you have monsters, they'll attack you, you have to defend yourself, or you need to harvest materials, things of that nature. um and it feels almost a bit high fantasy, where rather than having a clearer difference or barrier between good and evil, good and bad, um, you know, monster and non-monster, you can start to explore. Okay, this is a creature, but you can talk to it, right? And I think that Larian is actually pretty good at this, right? Where they have a lot of those animals that you can talk to, and you can piss them off, or you can help them, and they'll become enemies, or they'll become friends because of that. So again, it's like I guess depending on what you want in your world, what you want your world to achieve, you might have sentient races and races of monsters or animals that are just openly hostile towards the player. And that because it creates friction, right? It's a way for the developers to throw in a challenge, something that has lethality to it. So it's a way for you to feel that rush of adrenaline where something could kill you or you kill it, right? So it's replacing that is not as easy as it sounds. It's like, oh, I'm gonna make a game about where you become friends with all the animals, but then it's like, okay, you're getting rid of lethality now, and that's okay. You can make a successful game like that, but you're turning the game into something very different just by removing this lethality to the world. I think it's a default because it's expected most of the time, and AAA companies like to stay safe and do the same thing they're used to. It's expected, but I also don't think that people hate it. I mean, I don't think anybody's buying the next big AAA RPG and feeling as if they're tired of killing things. At least I'm not. I mean, and it's not to say that I can't be tired of killing in a game. You know, Dragon's Dogma 2, because of the density and respawn time of enemies and the amount that you're expected to travel on foot. Yeah, in that game, I felt like it was tiring having to kill things, but it wasn't because the action of killing was itself boring or was itself unrewarding. So I think it is just as a thought experiment and as a, you know, low level philosophical design kind of topic. It's very clear games don't need killing to be successful. AAA games don't need killing to be successful, but replacing it also means that you're removing lethality from your world unless you have enough, you know, lethal player versus environment kind of thing, like poisonous traps. So yeah, I mean either could work. Violence aka combat is not hated, it's a staple for RPGs. To be honest, it's something good. You need to blow some steam away. Yeah, and it's something that you're not allowed to do in or violence in solitaire. Yeah, Balatro, but with guns. Um what was I saying? Because it's a taboo, right? It's something you're not allowed to do in real life, so it kind of just throws you into that fantasy, right? Where yeah, I'm killing a bunch of bandits. I mean, it's I can't do this in real life unless well, depending on the state that you're living or the country you're living in, you might have the authority to kill bandits. But generally speaking, you're not allowed to just go and pop a cap in some citizens and get away with it. But in a game, you can, or even if you don't get away with it, you can just reload the save, right? So taboos in games are just, of course, very interesting to players because they like the fantasy. They like being able to do things in games that they can't do in real life. And throwing yourself into worlds that are rife with conflict and, you know, full of like gangs and mobs and, you know, things that just don't exist in our real life or that add lethality that we don't have to deal with is very different. I also usually like to see cool skill animation spells. I could just cast them without killing NPCs. That's true, and I mean, you know, if we want to take the idea of like Skyrim, but now instead of killing animals or people, you befriend them and heal them and help them. Yeah, I mean it's very doable. It's not like that would be a bad game. It would just be a very different game, and the world itself would not be able to explore certain themes because it would be a complete juxtaposition of what the player themselves is doing, unless you were to force the player into a specific role where instead of just being the lone wanderer or the you know, the random prisoner who's escaped, you would now have to be in a role where even though violence and death and killing exists in the world, you're not expected to do that. And you know, Colden Chronicles is kind of like that, but of course, you still have the option to kill people.
If you don't feel like watching this, the TLDW is companies make games, and in general products, that people will buy.
Exactly. Yeah.
There, that's it. It means games that sell the most, and I'm not even talking about review the best, just sell the most, will dictate future games.
Yeah, and Skyrim without killing, like we, you know, I said at the start of the video, I just don't think that the demographics are there for the budgets that these AAA companies are spending, and that's why violence is the norm, is because that's what most people are buying, aka that's where most of the money is. And it's like, okay, indie developers can get away with it because smaller budgets, more niche audiences. It's just easier that way. It's still risky, but it's less risk.
This is obvious. If you have a
Yeah,
company and it's trying to make money, and there's one game type that sells millions of copies and another one that sells 100,000, which one are you going to do if they both take just as much time and money to develop? Kind of
yeah,
obvious, but as a side note, this is why I always tell people vote with your dollars. And I know people always come back and go, "Hey, I can't do that." And then they list a bunch of reasons, like it won't matter anyway, or I don't have a choice, or sometimes you're in an environment where the only thing available to buy is this thing that's not that good.
but I mean, yeah, I get it too. But look, if the AAA market isn't doing it, then it is up to indies to push that. And even if that trend were to never change, I think that there's always going to be an audience for games that don't include violence. There absolutely are. I mean, there are tons of games like that. I mean, games too that might include interacting with other people and other creatures but don't include violence, as well as games that just don't have anything to do with violence at all, right? Like some puzzle game or whatever. This barbecue's made in people's backyards, not restaurants. There's some pretty good restaurants though.
Get it. I get it.
Yeah, cozy
I
games
will
is a
say
good one.
this though. If you think you're just a drop in the bucket, if enough people do this, those drops become a
Yeah,
storm and companies will
yeah,
listen.
it's true.
There are products and stores and entire companies that I will not buy from. I don't think they care or even notice, but I do. And it's just one of those things that you have to draw the line somewhere, and everybody draws it in a different spot, and I get it. You have a different financial situation, or you have a different situation about, where you actually live and what is available to you. I get it. But to not draw a line because you think it won't matter is a way to guarantee it won't matter. It's
Yes.
like when people say I don't vote because my one vote won't
I
matter.
was, dude, I was just, Tim, oh my God, I was just about to say it's like people that don't vote or they vote for one side, the side that's going to win because they think that their side won't win. And I want to make this about certain politics or politics in general, but like if you aren't willing to stand with your principles, then of course those principles aren't going to matter, right? So, just like you said, vote with your wallet. If you want more games like something specific, then buy games that's like what you want to buy or that you want to play. It's as simple as that. Now, I don't know if AAA developers are ever going to take notice because again, if the money isn't there, they think the choice is an illusion. I mean, I get it too. I always vote pretty much independent. I've never voted for a mainline candidate in political elections because I just don't like them. I don't like them and I don't like their extreme politics. So I get it. And of course, none of them have ever won. None of the people I voted for. But at least I don't regret my vote.
If once enough people think that way, it matters. So let's go back and talk about the question. Action genres tend to sell very
Yes, they do,
well.
especially in North America.
So by that I mean action RPGs kind of outsell classic
Mm-hmm.
RPGs. Even though both of them have violence, action RPGs are more paced to constantly doing not turn-based combat, no pauses, no stop to read something, less dialogues, less walls of text, things like that. But by many people, action means violence. The thing you're doing is shooting creatures, shooting people, attacking them, that kind of stuff. Because it's what people seem to
Yeah,
want.
it's just the numbers are there, and it's flashy, it's gory, it's shocking. It's just I don't want to. I don't know if I want to spend the whole video breaking down why I think that violence is the most sellable form of action, but it's just the money is there. It's clearly there, and if we look at game genre sales, game genre market. I mean, there's for sure market share, but I'd like to look at it also based on part of the world too. But yeah, shooters. I mean, shooters are pretty much number one, right? I don't really want to include mobile in this for the most part, but I mean, you have shooters, adventure, battle royale, role playing. Those are pretty much the big ones on both PC and consoles. And it's like when you have a shooter, 9 times out of, or 99 times out of 100, it's with guns and it's at other things that will die. It's not like Splatoon or something, right? Which you could say is a shooter, but you're not killing people. So it's just the numbers aren't there to support people who want non-violent action games. Yeah, shooter is pretty much all the way up there. Action adventure, and a lot of action adventure games also have that there too. 7% of 65 and older are playing shooters. I need to meet those old people. Those seem like pretty cool old people. Yeah, these are kind of weird statistics though. Game genre preferences by country. This is just UK. Oh. In Poland. I swear there used to be a really good graph that showed North America versus Europe, which is a pretty interesting one. I can't find it though. The World War II veterans. Say one thing what US prefers is that as shooters. Yes, it's pretty much I mean that would be number one. I mean that's where like Call of Duty sells the most. That's why they market primarily towards the North American audience. Shooters are by and large the most popular in North America.
This
The
translates
biggest
into
market for shooters.
sales. It's also easier to market those kind of
Mm-hmm.
games. When you watch a trailer and you see people actually doing things, jumping, climbing, shooting,
It's just
punching,
flashy.
it looks like, whoa, that look at all the things you can do in that
Yeah, and they
game.
can they can shove those ads into pretty much anywhere, right? Like any Netflix or whatever. Netflix doesn't run ads, but in TV shows they used to do, on like Adult Swim, um, in the Super Bowl, things like that. So it just it's flashy. It's easy to gather people's interest and attention from flashy gun, go boom boom, people die, explosion of blood.
Leonard Barsky and I have had really good laughs over the years when we've tried to market our games and we wanted to point out, hey, you can do a lot more than just combat in here,
Not a lot of people
because
are interested.
it's hard to show the other things. When we were putting
Yeah.
together the Outer Worlds
Well, also that
marketing,
too. You have to target. When you're making ads, you have to target people where they want that game. And if you target like the next Call of Duty, but you have an option for pacifist sort of options, people aren't going to want to see that. And he's right. When you show off an RPG where you have all these different choices, what do you show? Do you show the player making, interacting with an NPC and then each three outcomes? So you're repeating the same three like clips of interacting with the NPC, but with I don't know, it's really hard to show it off, and I think that it is shown off better in extended gameplay clips or unedited gameplay or a developer breakdown. But then that, of course, is not really that marketable. It's not. It won't make for a flashy good ad.
we had big discussions with the marketing people and the external trailer people that we hired. How do we show that this game has a really good story? How do we show that it has fantastic dialogue? How do you do that in a trailer that may only be 15 or 30 seconds long? I mean, you have to reduce this wonderful narrative that's super creative and nuanced and has a huge arc down to a soundbite.
Yeah, and you know what? Out of curiosity, what do the trailers for Outer Worlds look like? Outer Worlds gameplay trailer. I'm curious if they included any of this in the for E3. Really loud. So I mean, they have 2.5 minutes roughly here. Let's just say 2 minutes.
The corporate model is the oldest and most efficient
And I
structure
think that in
in
2 minutes you can absolutely showcase the general story, but showcasing, dialogue,
has ever shown us.
that's always a challenge, especially choices.
Scheduled scarcity is a premium feature of colonial life. The colony must never lose faith. That is what the board provides. Security in a senseless and chaotic world.
This is Halcyon, the furthest colony in the galaxy, proudly owned and operated by corporations.
And you can see even here when they're trying to showcase the story, they also want to showcase how the game looks and feels, which, say what you want, players mostly buy with their eyes in a lot of cases. And that doesn't mean that gameplay is not as important, because you can show gameplay and that's, can be very visible. But that goes back to what Tim and I are saying, where it's like, it's just the gunplay is flashy.
Everything we have, everything we are,
This is a great setup.
we owe to them.
And it's like, okay, what's the gameplay?
They are always with us. No one has ever gone against them.
And then comes the flashiness.
A stranger has just arrived. Someone who's challenging the corporate board. Someone who's digging up their secrets. Someone who could be a villain. Or a hero.
Looks like the bleeding stopped. I owe you one. Here, hope this gun serves
I
you.
like that way of showing it off too, right? Where, it's kind of the question mark hero, the self-insert protagonist, where the narration's like, they can be whatever, they could be the hero, they could be the villain. I think that is a really good way of showing it off.
You better than it did me.
Or a psychopath.
Oh,
Yeah, that's a really good way of doing it, I think.
my time to shine.
And then you can jump into all the flashy, fun combat.
I suppose time will tell, but no matter who this stranger chooses to be, the Halcyon colony will never be the same.
Yeah, I think they did a good job with that there, in hindsight.
And guess what? It's because most people won't watch more than a few seconds of something. We didn't used to have 15-second commercials when I was a kid. They were always a minute. Then it got reduced to 30 seconds. Now they're 15 seconds. I've seen some stuff done now in YouTube channels, the ones where people hawk stuff, where the internal hawking, I'm not talking when it cuts to a YouTube ad, they're to just mention it really quick, like, oh, and by the way, if you want to see a quiz, go to blah blah site. And they just do it real fast, because if they talk any longer, people will skip. So it's like this because
People got their brains cooked with short form content. Yeah, I don't mind some short form content, but I never got into watching. It's weird too, because I probably have ADHD, right? You'd think that I would be a huge lover of like Vine, of YouTube Shorts, of what is it, TikTok. But I always hated them. I never even had a TikTok account, so I don't know what it is. But I've always loved the long form content and just a uninterrupted, unedited discussion about something deeper. There's a study that came out that showed that brain rot was actually real, and more short form content consumption changed your brain matter. I think the alcohol is going to do that for me, to be honest.
this is how people react to it. You may not like it, you may try to deny it, but enough people react to this thing that companies have to look at this and go, this is what people react to. I won't say they want it, but this is what people buy. This is what keeps people attention focused. So this is what they do. Proof of this is there are lots of games out there that either have no violence at all, or there's no violence that the player can do.
Yeah.
Look, I mean, there are so many puzzle games, card games, there are adventure games, way back to Seventh Guest and Myst, to The Witness or Life is Strange, that don't really have combat
Witness
built into
mentioned.
them. It's basically you walk around, you look at things, you talk to people, you figure things out. Those sell well enough, obviously, to keep making them.
Yes, they do.
But action games far outsell those things.
Well, I think
And I
that
know-
some of it also just has to, again, it's flashy, and I think it has to do with the demographics. But of course, too, the not only the location where you're selling, but also the platform that you're selling on matters a lot. So I think games that don't prioritize or front load violence will be better on things like the Switch or on mobile. But when it comes to console and PC, there is a much larger market for those types of games. Blow must be creaming right now. I've seen Jonathan Blow do some talks with people. I'd love to talk with him, but I don't know. He feels like he's on another level than me, just like Tim Kaine. I really like having just those deep design discussions where there is no right answer. It's more of just a deep dive that we return, and we've thought about something much deeper than before. It's more technical. Yeah, he's way more technical. If I were like a better programmer, I think I'd be better with it.
So there's occasional exceptions, like farming and gardening and plot-based games.
Mm-hmm.
Not plot, it's a narrative. Plot is in you grow stuff. Farming games.
Mm-hmm.
But those exceptions kind of prove the rule, because if you look at like the Steam top 50 or top 100, you see an awful lot of action, violent-oriented games. The companies don't make them because they feel like it. They make them because they sell.
Yep.
What I've always tried to push back on that is there have always been RPGs that you don't need to do violence. So I've always touted my RPGs as not only not needing violence, not needing you to make a combat character, but I don't even tout that one as the default path. I don't consider combat the main path and stealth and dialogue as the alternatives. I always said this game supports multiple paths. You want to talk your way through it? Knock yourself out. You want to stealth your way through it? Go for it. Even when there's like combat that has to be done, usually your companions can do it, or you can use stealth or dialogue to avoid it, or reduce it so low that it becomes a relatively trivial fight. Combine that to the fact that there are easy modes and now even things called story modes that vastly reduce the violence. There are options there, but people don't take them as much. People play the non-story modes more often than story modes. I know there are people who love story mode, and that's great, and that's why we put them in there. But more people don't play it.
It's a niche balanced
In the
edition,
non-story mode.
and I think when it comes to like AAA RPGs, if we're thinking like an RPG that Tim Kaine would make, I do prefer when this is more like tabletop, right? And I can go up to a group of bandits. Let's just say there are 4 bandits and I have 3 companions, so it's 4 against 4. In most cases, if we're pretty decked out and they look pretty weak, on tabletop, I would expect that there's probably a way to intimidate them to run away. But you don't really get that in video games. It's more like the designers chose to put 4 bandits here so that you could fight 4 bandits, get some loot, and then go into town and sell it. But I would much rather see even just really basic dialogue options of trying to, allowing them to run away, or allowing them to, forcing, maybe goading them to fight, or something in between that. So that, just like Tim says, there is, there's still violence, but it's not the main or only route.
Here's a funny story, and I don't know if I've mentioned this, but when we were developing Fallout, there was someone who was playing through it just shooting every NPC they encountered before they could even talk. And,
Murder hobo.
I kind of knew there were people who were going to do this, but it turns out he broke the game, and he broke it with Gizmo in Junktown. He walked into that room and just shot Gizmo right in the head before it could say a word. And that broke the game. It literally broke the main story progression. This shocked me because I didn't think that was possible. And we looked into it, and it's because he gave you something that wasn't in his inventory. It was an item, and it was created by the script that transferred it. So we had to change the design to make sure you could still get that thing even if he was dead. And then I had the designers comb through the entire game looking for things like that, where shooting an NPC before they could even talk to you, if that was possible. There were a few that could talk to you automatically, like the Overseer. And I think we made essential until the end of the game. But we made sure it was not possible to break the main storyline with violence, dialogue, or stealth, because I wanted every character build to be able to make it through to the end, which was really important for my game. And I thought it was interesting that it was violence that broke it. You would think violence was the default of Fallout, but it really wasn't. People frequently made quests and thought, this isn't what the player's going to do. Violence is not going to be the go-to in this one. But guess what? Combing through Fallout, while we were dealing with crash bugs and all the other things we were dealing with that was making the game late in shipping, that took time and money. So yeah, we're back to that old bugaboo, time and money. That's the main reason. It's my main answer for a lot of these things. Companies make games that people will buy. So they try to make games that people will buy a lot so that the investment into the game gets returned more. So they can have some of the money and go, look at the money, we're going to sleep on a bed of money, but also to reinvest in future games to make.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's something that people often miss when they're talking about, like, let's say, Dragon Age Veilguard is the popular talking point at the moment just because it's the most recent big expenditure, and it wasn't a complete flop or a complete success, so, people are always wondering. It's like, well, okay, the budget was about $250 million, and they sell the game for $70 each, right, or $80 or whatever it was. And they forget that it's not just about returning on the initial investment. It's not just about making $250 million, because you have to remember that the investors that have put money into EA or have put money specifically into this game have expectations to make money back from that, not just the initial million or 2 million or whatever that they put into it. So not only does this game need to sell a certain amount just to make back its initial cost, but it needs to make the shareholders money, which again, it just increases the budget further. So, the actual amount of money that a game needs to make in order to be considered to be considered financially successful is even higher than we would want to admit. It's nasty. It's a really nasty business, and I think the AAA developers are just they've flown too high at this point, and either chasing trends or trying to push expectations or trying to be the best. And it's just like the money, this amount of money does not exist unless you were to sell the game to every single gamer on the market and sell the game for a significantly higher amount than you're charging for it, right? Like that's why the whole GTA 6 might cost $100. Well, it's like, yeah, because I bet they've spent nearly $500 million on that game. I don't know if there's any actual, numbers or figures for how much GTA 6 is costing, but I would be pretty sure that it's going to cost $500 million, maybe even more. Bro, give me $250 million, I'll make the best damn game. I wish I had some of that money too. I have to have the smallest team possible. I mean, team size 2 is always. Here's the funny thing is, I had a few publishers ask me for Golden Chronicles, and to be fair, this was before we had a lot of the other tertiary systems in the game. Where is this money going? They just didn't see how this game cost $3 to $4 million, even with the budget that I was giving them. I'm like, guys, this is mostly with Polish workers. If I hired people in the US to work on this game would be like way more expensive. Where in my fucking pocket? Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It seems so hard to get. I hate to call, a few $1 million a measly amount of money, but it's like when you're paying people salary, it is a measly amount of money because salaries are expensive. But it just seems so difficult to get a few million in order to make a game that I think will have a higher percentage ROI than most of these AAA games. Because it's one thing where it's like, okay, we spend $250 million, we make $300 million. Well, the ROI is actually not that great, right? The percentage wise, it's not that great, especially based on the amount of time that has been put into it. But you can then have a game where it's like, okay, it cost us 100,000 and we made $10 million from it. That seems like a much better investment for people with a lot of money. It is amazing, and at the same time, it isn't. We lived in fucked up times. We do. I mean, it's like, yes, okay, I could see the 3 million in my bank account theoretically. Let's just say, but it's like, well, yeah, this has to go to paying around 15 people full time for 3 years. So it's not like it's my money. It's not like I'm a millionaire, but yeah, it would be cool to see and be like, damn, I've never seen that much money in my bank account, and I will never have that much money in my bank account. That's the company's bank account.
Make more games. If people rarely chose nonviolence in AAA games, then because they rarely choose the nonviolence, games like that don't sell as much, and so they probably won't be made again. It's that simple. It's a chain. It's a deductive chain. I like rarely chosen paths. I put dumb dialogue in a lot of my games. I like to support generalists or really bizarre specialists. And these are supported in my games. In fact, I played the first low-int full playthrough in Fallout. The character's name was Potato, and I finished the game with Potato and proved that a one intelligence character could finish that game. And it was hard because he didn't get very many skill points, because skill points in Fallout depended on your intelligence. In Arcanum, I played a non-mage, non-tech person. It was just a swordsman. It was just a guy with a sword. I didn't buy any spells, and I didn't buy any of the tech schematics or the tech skills. I tried to keep my magic tech meter on 0. That was a hard playthrough, because lots of things were enticing me to do something else. In Temple of Elemental Evil, I've mentioned that I played an all-halfling, all-bard party. All the player characters were halfling bards, and I didn't bring on any companions. It was a difficult playthrough, but I did it. And in fact, that's why it was later when the game shipped and we found out that there was a major crash bug involving bards. I was shocked I never saw it. Turns out it has to do with keeping your bard songs running when you switched maps, and I always shut mine down afterwards. But anyway, a lot of games remove these less common paths, and they see little to no reduction in sales, meaning there weren't enough of you who liked those paths and this is the important part, and based your purchase of the game on those paths being there. Some of you may want it, but you still buy games that don't have it. So all they know is, we can develop this game for less money and faster and have less to test if we get rid of these less common paths.
Yeah, it's like they'll be cutting down, in like 5% of their player base, but at the same time they're cutting back 30% of their budget. So I can't blame them for making that decision. I mean, we're facing that too with our own game, Cauldron Chronicles, where it's just, in order to support the amount of choices that the player can make, it just gets exponentially more and more difficult to organize that and to support it without bugs. So it's a lot of work. But I also think that it gives games a lot of staying power, and also makes them quite interesting to stream, various methods, right?
But deliberately deleting a common path, that often does lead to less sales. So that's why they're there. And you have to think about this, because if you're risking someone else's money, which in AAA RPGs you are, because I hear people already going, well, indies don't do this and self-pubs don't do it. OP asked about AAA RPGs, things that have budgets of 100 million and are climbing.
Also, I disagree. Indies and self-published games do also do this. And I think that it's really stupid if you're making a game not to consider the market that you're making it for. Now, it's not to say that you can't open up a new market or you can't develop a new niche. I mean, it's just very hard to... What's the word? To anticipate when your game is going to create a new genre. Most of the time, it's not something that you anticipate, or, be the resurgence of that genre, right? Where I think that to some extent Stardew Valley was a bit of a resurgence of the farming sim that Harvest Moon had, control of on the DS. So it's just that it's really hard to predict that this is going to be the outcome. So I think that indie developers still also do need to be conscious of, what game am I making, how many sales, do some competition analysis and determine, if I'm making this game, roughly how many people are actually going to want to buy it. And that's one of the ways that you mitigate risk, right? That's one of the ways that you convince a publisher, hey, I need some money for my indie game. Although, is it still indie if you have a publisher? Well, that's a whole different topic. But either way, it's one of the ways you mitigate risk is you say, well, our goal is to sell 1 million copies, right? And our sale value is $30 for our game. So before taxes and fees, 30 million. And then we can break that down from there. So probably maybe 20 million walk home cash. After taxes and fees, game budget is 2 million, so you've returned on that 10 times. But of course, if you miscalculate that niche by maybe, let's say, twice, you think, oh, we want to sell, our target is 1 million copies, we sell 500,000. Maybe that's not what you promised shareholders or investors, right? And now they're upset. Now they demand more, and it's a bad chain reaction, and it's one of the reasons that we're trying to develop our game without any shareholders, right? Is that I need to make sure that I maintain creative control over the game and we don't force it out before it's ready. But I don't know if that's even viable in these times. It to me that as we come to an end of the video where there has been no mention of humans being predators throughout time, to make life easier, become anxious and look for violence and activity similar to what most big games give us. I think that maybe Tim here is talking a bit about, it's more about it from like a business side of why is violence the default in AAA RPGs, and less asking why do we choose games with violent paths over others. Because I agree that I think they're both interesting, but yeah, I don't know. I kind of went into this thinking it might be more about the philosophical nature of violence, but it is more about like the business nature of why do people buy games with default violent paths. And it's because it sells. Because it sells, that's where all the money is, so people just keep making games where the money is.
You got to think about, you're risking someone else's money. And you want to work again after this. So if you put out a game that doesn't sell well, that's horrible for the company, but it's not exactly something that makes your resume look good. And so everybody wants a game that sells well, but you want it to be good, you want it to be reflective of your POV and all that. But the bottom line is violence currently sells well. It's sold well for a long time and way outside of games. Violent movies, TV shows, books, they sell well.
Yep.
So companies will continue to make violent games. I hope that answers your question. Saber VS7.
Yeah, I don't know if it's just one of those things where I have a tough time talking about it because I don't know if it should change. I'm okay with pretty much any game. I support the idea that you can make whatever game you want, and there's probably a niche that will buy it. It's just how big is that niche? Because, the more time and money you spend on it, the more that you're going to have to get back in order to continue moving forward stably, right? So it is what it is. It is what it is. But there will always be a market for people who want non-violent games, and I think that if you can create a non-violent game with interesting enough gameplay, yeah, it could sell. You could convince people to try your game even though it isn't considered what is standard. But it will probably never be as large as people who like violent shooters or something, right? Well, here's a link if you guys like that. And for watching on YouTube, thank you for watching that one, and I will catch you on the next one. So thank you so much. Bye, YouTube. YouTube.